The Vallani had watched the stars for 12,000 years without ever building a weapon. Their homeworld was a beautiful blue planet called Sereth Prime. It circled a quiet yellow sun at the edge of the galaxy. The Vallani were tall and gray, with 4 slender arms and large eyes that seemed to glow in dim light. They ate only plants. They spent their lives thinking deep thoughts and studying the universe. They had never fought a war, not once in all their long history. When the Galactic Concord formed 600 years ago, the Vallani joined as honored guests. Other species respected their wisdom and listened to their advice. But no one expected them to fight. Everyone knew the Vallani did not believe in violence. Ambassador Catherine stood at a large window on Unity Station, watching distant lights flash in the darkness of space. Those lights were not stars. They were explosions. Ships dying. People dying. The war had been going on for 5 years now, and it was getting worse. Commander Daniel Brooks stood next to him. He was a human 42 years old, with tired eyes and gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had been fighting this war since it began. 3 more colonies fell yesterday, Daniel said quietly. The Kreth Dominion keeps pushing closer to Earth. Catherine's inner eyelids moved slowly. This was how his people showed sadness. We have heard the news. The Concord continues to debate what should be done. Debate. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Kreth don't waste time debating. They just take what they want. They conquer. They enslave. And the Concord does nothing but talk. You expected something different, Commander? Daniel turned to look at the alien ambassador. I expected something. Anything. Your people have the best technology in the known galaxy. Your ships are more advanced than anything we've ever seen. You can help us. You could change everything. Our ships offer research, Catherine said gently. We have not built weapons in 7,000 years. We do not know how anymore. Then maybe it's time to learn. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Outside the window, another flash of light marked another death dot far away from Unity Station. A young officer named Maria Santos was working the night shift on a small patrol ship called the Steadfast. It was an old ship, not very powerful, but it was one of the few left protecting the outer colonies. Most of the fleet had pulled back toward Earth at 0347 hours. A distress signal came through. Maria sat up straight in her command chair. What is it? Her sensor officer, a young man named Kevin Park, looked at his screens with fear in his eyes. It's coming from Refuge 7, that farming colony on the edge of Concord space. What's happening there? Kevin swallowed hard. Kreth raiders. At least 12 ships. They're already in orbit around the planet. Maria felt her stomach drop. Refuge 7 was home to 17,000 people. Families. Children. People who had moved to the edge of space, hoping to find peaceful lives away from the war. How long to get there at maximum speed? 4 hours. 4 hours. Maria knew what that meant. A Kreth raid only took 2 hours. By the time the Steadfast arrived, it would all be over. She gave the order anyway. Set course for Refuge 7. Maximum speed. Kevin looked at her. Captain, we can't fight 12 Kreth ships. We'll be destroyed. I know. Do it anyway. The Steadfast turned toward Refuge 7 and began to fly as fast as it could. Ambassador. Catherine was meditating in his room when his assistant brought him the news about Refuge 7. The young Vallani's hands were shaking. As he handed over the report, Catherine, read it 3 times. 7,000 people dead. 10,000 more taken prisoner. The Kreth had loaded them onto transport ships and carried them away to work in the mines of the Dominion. They would be slaves until they died. The Steadfast had arrived to find only burning fields and empty buildings. Everyone was gone. Catherine sat very still for a long time. Then he did something no Vellani ambassador had done in hundreds of years. He asked to speak with Earth's leaders. The meeting took place in Geneva, in a building that had been rebuilt after a Kreth attack 3 years earlier. The original building had been beautiful. This one was just functional. A bunker with nice decorations. 7 humans sat in a half circle, facing Catherine. They were the High Council, the leaders of Earth. Their faces showed the exhaustion of people who had stopped expecting good news. Council. Chair Patricia Shaw spoke first. You wanted to address us, Ambassador. We're listening. Catherine folded all 4 of his arms. I have a question. A question that has troubled my people since we first met humanity. Ask your question. The Vellani took a deep breath. Why do you fight? Patricia blinked. I'm sorry? The Kreth have more ships than you. More soldiers. More worlds. Their technology is better than yours. By every calculation, you cannot win this war. Catherine looked at each council member in turn. Logic says you should surrender. Accept Kreth rule. Your people would survive, even if life would be hard. But you keep fighting. Billions have died. And still you fight. I want to know why. The room was silent. An old man named Admiral Christopher Blake was the one who answered. He was 67 years old and had spent his whole life in the military. He had lost 2 sons in this war. Because surrender isn't really surviving, he said. His voice was rough but strong. The Kreth don't want citizens. They want slaves. They'll work our people to death in their mines and factories. Then they'll throw away what's left. He leaned forward. We fight because we'd rather die free than live in chains. We fight because some things are more important than just staying alive, even knowing you will lose. Even then, Catherine did not speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice had a strange quality that the human translators could not quite capture. My people believe peace is the most important thing. We have never raised weapons against anyone. We have never known war. He paused. But I am starting to wonder if we have ever truly known courage. The old admiral met the alien's glowing eyes. Neither of them looked away. Something was changing. Something that would affect the entire galaxy. But neither of them knew it yet. Ambassador Catherine did not return to his quarters after the meeting with Earth's High Council. Instead, he asked Commander Daniel Brooks to show him something different. Something real. I want to see how your people live, Catherine said. Not your leaders. Not your diplomats. Your ordinary people. The ones who are fighting this war. Daniel studied the alien for a moment. In 5 years of knowing Catherine, he had never heard him make such a request. Are you sure? It's not pretty out there. I am sure. So Daniel took him. They visited hospitals first. Long rooms filled with beds, filled with wounded soldiers and civilians. Men and women missing arms and legs. Children burned by Kreth weapons. Doctors and nurses working without rest, trying to save lives with supplies that were running low. Catherine walked through those rooms in silence. He watched a young nurse named Lisa Grant hold the hand of a dying man. She stayed with him until the end, even though she had 100 other patients waiting. She could save more lives if she moved on, Catherine observed quietly. Probably, Daniel agreed. But she won't let him die alone. That matters to us. They visited refugee camps next. Thousands of people who had fled destroyed colonies, living in tents and temporary shelters. Families with nothing left but the clothes they wore. Yet Catherine saw children playing games in the dirt. He saw people sharing food with strangers. He saw an old woman teaching a group of young ones how to read. They have lost everything, Catherine said. Why do they still teach? Why do they still play? Because life goes on, Daniel replied. because giving up means the Kreth win, even if we're still breathing. They visited a military base where young soldiers were training. Most of them were barely adults, 18 or 19 years old. They knew they would probably die in battle. The statistics said most of them would not survive their first year of combat, but they trained anyway. They laughed with each other. They wrote letters to their families. They talked about what they would do after the war ended, even though they knew they might never see that day. On the last day of his journey, Catherine stood beside Maria Santos at a small memorial service. 17 stones had been placed in a circle, each one representing 1,000 people lost at Refuge 7. It was all they could do. There were no bodies to bury. Maria's face was hard as stone, but her eyes were wet. She had arrived too late to save anyone. That knowledge would stay with her forever. Does it help? Catherine asked softly. This ceremony? Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Not really, but we do it anyway. We remember them. We say their names. We make sure they're not forgotten. She looked at him. That's all we can give them now. Catherine returned to Unity Station and began writing his report to the Council of Elders on Sereth Prime. He worked on it for 3 days without sleeping. When he finished, it was the longest report any Vellani ambassador had ever sent home. They know they are dying, he wrote. They know their species might not survive this century. Yet they continue to build, to create, to love and marry and raise children. They plant trees whose shade they will never enjoy. They write books they might never finish. They fight not because they believe they will win, but because they believe the fight itself has meaning. I have studied 100 species across this galaxy. I have never met one like humanity. I have also studied the Kreth, their expansion patterns, their treatment of conquered peoples, their long-term plans. I must tell you, honored elders, that if humanity falls, we will be next. Not soon, perhaps, not for centuries, but eventually, the Kreth will reach Sereth Prime. When they do, our pacifism will not protect us. The humans have taught me something I never expected to learn. Peace is not just the absence of violence. Peace is what remains worth protecting when violence. Commies, I believe it is time for the Vellani to decide what we are willing to protect. The message took 3 weeks to reach Sereth Prime. The Council of Elders read it in silence. Then began the longest debate in Vellani history. For 47 days, they talked. They argued. They questioned everything their civilization had believed for 7,000 years. Some elders said the old ways must be preserved. The Vellani had survived this long by staying out of conflicts. Why change now? Others said survival without honor was meaningless. If they watched innocent people die and did nothing, what did their philosophy really mean? The debate might have gone on for months, but something happened that changed everything. On the streets of the capital city, young Vellani began to gather. Not to protest, because their people had no tradition of protest. They simply stood together in public squares, holding small lights, waiting in silence. Reporters came to ask them questions. What are you waiting for? One reporter asked a young female named Terrace. Her answers spread across the planet within hours. We are waiting for our elders to remember something, Terrace said. Peace is not the same as neutrality. Watching evil happen and doing nothing is not virtue. It is cowardice wearing a mask of philosophy. Those words hit the Council of Elders like a thunderbolt. Elder Matriarch Solène, who had led the council for 200 years, called an emergency session that night. She stood before her fellow elders with tears in her large, glowing eyes. Our children shame us, she said. They understand what we have forgotten. Peace must be defended, or it is not peace at all. It is merely waiting for destruction to arrive. The vote was taken at dawn, for the first time in 7,000 years. The Vellani chose to enter a war. Admiral Blake received the message while standing in Earth's command bunker. The holographic map in front of him showed humanity's situation. Blue dots represented human colonies. Red dots represented Kreth conquests. There was a lot more red than blue, and the red kept spreading. Admiral, Catherine's face appeared on a main screen. The Council of Elders has reached a decision. Blake prepared himself for another polite refusal. He had heard many of those over the years. We are sending ships, Catherine continued. 47 research vessels. Our engineers have spent the last month adding defensive systems to them. We are also sending something more valuable than ships. Blake's heart almost stopped. What? Knowledge. Our scientists have studied Kreth technology for centuries. We know its weaknesses. We know how to defeat it. Catherine unfolded his forearms in a gesture Blake had never seen before. The Vellani have chosen Admiral. We have chosen to stand with humanity. Blake felt tears forming in his eyes. He blinked them away, but his voice still shook when he spoke. Why now? After all this time, why now? Catherine was quiet for a moment before answering. Because we finally understood the right question. It was never about whether we could stay peaceful. It was about whether our peace meant anything if we bought it by letting others suffer. You taught us that, Admiral. Your species, with all its flaws and problems. You taught us that some things matter more than survival. Blake stood straighter. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The first Vellani ships arrived at Unity Station, 6 weeks after the Council of Elders made their decision. Maria Santa stood at the observation deck, watching them come in. She had been released from the hospital only 2 days ago. Her body still hurt from her injuries, but she refused to stay in bed. She wanted to see this moment with her own eyes. The Vellani ships were beautiful, long and graceful, with hulls that shimmered like the inside of a seashell. They looked more like living creatures than machines. They moved through space as if they were swimming through water. Commander Daniel Brooks stood beside her. They're calling it the Liberation Fleet, he said. Half human ships, half Vellani ships. First time in galactic history that two species have fought together like this. Maria watched as the alien vessels took their positions alongside human warships. The contrast was striking. Human ships were angular and rough, built for war. Vellani ships were smooth and elegant, built for exploration. Yet somehow, they looked right together. Will it make a difference? She asked. The Vellani shield technology alone changes everything, Daniel replied. Our ships can take 3 times more damage now. Their sensors can detect Kreth ambush before they even happen. Their medical technology can save soldiers who would have died before. He smiled, a real smile that reached his tired eyes. Yeah, I think it'll make a difference. On Sereth Prime, the changes were just as dramatic. Vellani engineers worked day and night to retrofit their research vessels. They had never built weapons before, but they were excellent at solving problems. They adapted mining lasers into energy cannons. They turned atmospheric processors into shield generators. They transformed scientific equipment into tools of war. It was not easy for them. Many Vellani struggled with what they were doing. Some refused to participate at all. But most understood that this was necessary. They were not becoming warriors. They were becoming protectors. Elder Matriarch Selene visited the shipyards every day. She watched her people work. She listened to their concerns. And she reminded them why they were doing this. We are not abandoning our beliefs, she told them. We still believe in peace. We still value life above all things. But we have learned that peace must be defended. Life must be protected. If we do nothing while innocent beings suffer, then our beliefs mean nothing. The young Vellani who had gathered in the streets became the heart of the new movement. They volunteered for every mission. They trained alongside human soldiers, They learned skills their ancestors had forgotten thousands of years ago. Terrace, the young female who had spoken to the reporters, became a symbol of the change. She trained as a field medic, learning to treat wounds and save lives on the battlefield. She would not carry weapons, but she would go wherever the fighting was worst. Why medical training? A human reporter asked her. Because that is how we can help, Terrace answered. We may be new to war, but we have always known how to heal. That is our gift to this alliance. The first joint military operation came sooner than anyone expected. Intelligence reports showed a major Kreth supply convoy moving through the Lyra sector. If the convoy reached its destination, it would provide enough resources for the Kreth to launch a new offensive against human space. Admiral Blake decided to intercept it. This will be our first real test, he told his officers. Human and Valani ships fighting side by side. We need to show the Kreth that everything has changed. We need to show the whole galaxy. The Liberation fleet moved out under cover of sensor-blocking fields that the Valani had developed. For the first time, human ships could approach enemy positions without being detected from far away. The Kreth convoy had 20 escort ships. The Liberation fleet had 30. Normally, that would mean a close fight with heavy losses on both sides. Kreth ships were tough and their crews were ruthless, but this battle was different. The Valani shields absorbed Kreth weapons fire that would have destroyed human ships. Valani sensors warned of attacks before they came. Valani targeting systems helped human gunners hit weak points in Kreth armor. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, 16 Kreth ships were destroyed. The convoy was captured. The Liberation fleet lost only 2 vessels. We did it, Maria whispered, watching the final Kreth ship surrender. She was commanding a new ship now, a fast cruiser called the Swift Justice. Her crew was a mix of humans and Valani. They had fought together like they had been doing it for years. Admiral Blake's voice came over the fleet communication channel. All ships, this is the Admiral. Today, we proved something important. We proved that together, we are stronger than we ever were alone. The Kreth have ruled this part of the galaxy through fear and division. Today, we showed them a different way. On the bridge of his command ship, Catherine stood beside Admiral Blake. The old human and the ancient alien looked at each other with new understanding. One battle does not win a war, Catherine said. No, Blake agreed. But it shows the war can be won. That's more than we had yesterday. News of the victory spread across human space within days. For the first time in 5 years, people had something to celebrate. The Valani, the peaceful philosophers who had never fought anyone, had entered the war on humanity's side. And they were making a difference. Other species in the Galactic Concord took notice too. Some began to reconsider their own neutrality. If the Valani could change their minds, perhaps others could too. On Kreth homeworld, the ruling council met in emergency session. Their spies had reported on the new alliance. Their admirals had explained what the Valani technology meant for future battles. For the first time in centuries, the Kreth were worried. The humans were supposed to fall by now, the High Commander growled. Instead, they grow stronger. This alliance must be broken. How? Asked one of his advisors. The Valani have committed fully. They will not abandon their new friends. The High Commander's eyes narrowed. Then we will show them the cost of friendship. We will make them regret their choice. He gave orders for a new offensive. Not against military targets. Against civilians. Against the weak. Against everything the Valani had joined the war to protect. The real test was coming. And it would be worse than anyone imagined. But something else was happening too. Something the Kreth did not expect. Deep in Kreth space, on worlds they had conquered long ago, slaves heard the news of the Liberation fleet. They heard that the Valani had joined the fight. They heard that the mighty Kreth, had lost a battle, and they began to hope. In labor camps and mines and factories across the Dominion, people started whispering to each other. Maybe freedom was possible. Maybe they would not be slaves forever. Maybe someone was coming to help them. Those whispers would grow louder. Those hopes would become plans. And one day soon, the Kreth would learn that you cannot crush hope forever. The tide of the war was beginning to turn. The Battle of Cygnus Gate would be remembered as the moment everything changed. The Kreth had gathered their largest fleet in living memory. 200 warships, carrying the best crews and the most powerful weapons the Dominion could build. Their mission was simple: break through the last major defense line between Kreth space and Earth, end the war once and for all. Human intelligence discovered the plan 3 days before the attack. Admiral Blake called an emergency meeting of the Liberation Fleet Command. "They're coming with everything they have," Blake told his officers. The holographic display showed the massive Kreth formation moving towards Cygnus Gate, a strategic point where several major space routes crossed. If they break through here, there's nothing between them and Earth. Captain Maria Santos studied the display. She commanded the Swift Justice now, one of the fastest ships in the fleet. "How many ships do we have?" 120. 60 humans, 60 Vellani. "That's not enough," someone muttered. "It will have to be," Blake replied. "We're not getting reinforcements. This is everything we have." He looked around the room at human and Vellani faces. "But we have something the Kreth don't expect. We have each other. And we have a plan." The plan was simple but dangerous. The Vellani had discovered a weakness in Kreth formation tactics. When Kreth ships grouped together, their shields interfered with each other. If the Liberation Fleet could force them into a tight formation, they would be vulnerable. "We'll use bait," Blake explained. "A small group of ships will pretend to retreat, drawing the Kreth forward. When they bunch up to pursue, the rest of our fleet hits them from 3 sides. The bait ships will take heavy fire," Maria observed. "Yes, I need volunteers." Maria raised her hand. "The Swift Justice will do it." Others followed. Soon, 30 ships had volunteered to be the bait. The fleets met at Cygnus Gate on a cold morning by Earth Standard Time. Maria watched the Kreth formation grow larger on her screens. 200 ships. It was the most enemy vessels she had ever seen in one place. Her mouth went dry, but her hands were steady on the controls. "All bait ships, begin the retreat." Admiral Blake's voice came through the communication system. "Make it look real. Make them chase you." Maria gave the order. "All ahead full. Let's make them angry." The Swift Justice and the other bait ships turned and ran. They fired backward at the Kreth, doing just enough damage to make the enemy want revenge. The Kreth took the bait. Their ships surged forward, grouping together as they chased what they thought was a retreating enemy. "They're bunching up," Maria's sensor officer reported. "Just like the Admiral predicted." "Now comes the hard part," Maria muttered. The Kreth were getting closer. Their weapons were starting to hit. The Swift Justice shook as enemy fire struck her shields. "Shields at 70%, her engineer called out. "Hold course." More hits. More shaking. A console exploded somewhere behind her. She heard someone scream. "Shields at 40%. Hold course." The Kreth formation was exactly where they needed it. Bunched together. Vulnerable. Maria watched her screens, waiting for the signal. "Now," Admiral Blake's voice commanded. "All ships, attack." The rest of the Liberation Fleet appeared from 3 directions at once. 60 ships from the left, 30 from the right, 30 from below. They hit the Kreth formation like a hammer hitting glass. The battle lasted 14 hours. It was chaos and fire and death. Ships exploded. People died. Maria lost track of how many times the Swift Justice should have been destroyed. Only the Vellani shields kept them alive, but the Kreth were dying faster. Their bunched formation meant their shields couldn't work properly. Human weapons found weak points that Vellani sensors revealed. Vellani medical ships darted through the battle, rescuing crews from damaged vessels, saving lives that would have been lost before dot in the 8th hour. Maria's ship took a direct hit to the engineering section. "We're losing atmosphere," her engineer shouted. "Hull breach on decks 3 and 4. Evacuate those sections. Keep fighting." They kept fighting, even when half the ship was dark. Even when the life support started failing. Even when Maria knew they wouldn't survive much longer. A Vellani rescue ship found them in the 9th hour. It pulled alongside and extended a docking tube, evacuating the Swift Justice's crew while Maria stayed at her post. "You need to leave," Catherine's voice came through her communicator. He was aboard the rescue ship personally. "Your ship is dying." "Not yet," Maria replied. "I can still fire weapons. I can still help. You will die. Then I die. But not until I've done everything I can." There was a long pause. Then Catherine said something Maria would never forget. "We chose well when we chose humanity." The Vellani rescue ship stayed close, shielding the dying Swift Justice with its own body, while Maria continued to fire at Kreth ship's dot in the 14th hour. The last Kreth vessel surrendered. 67 Kreth ships destroyed. Their fleet was broken. The survivors fled back toward Kreth space, and for the first time in the entire war, no one chased them. Maria finally let go of her controls. Her hands were shaking. Her ship was a wreck. But she was alive, and humanity had won. Admiral Blake's voice came over the fleet communication channel. "All ships, this is the Admiral. We did it. The first major human victory in 5 years." His voice cracked with emotion. "We lost 42 ships, 8,000 good people. But the Kreth lost more. And for the first time, they're scared." Maria was transferred to a Vellani medical ship. She had burns, broken bones, and radiation exposure. The Vellani doctors worked on her for 3 days before declaring her stable. When she woke up fully, Catherine was sitting beside her bed. "The war isn't over," he said. "But something has changed. The Kreth believed they could not lose. Now they know they can. That knowledge will spread through their empire like a disease." Maria tried to sit up, winced, and lay back down. "What happens now?" "Now we take back what they stole." Catherine's large eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Admiral Blake is planning an operation to liberate Refuge 7. The labor camp there is still active. There are survivors. Refuge 7, the colony Maria had failed to save. The place that haunted her dreams. "I want to be there," she said. "You are injured. I don't care. I have to be there." Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I understand. We will make sure you are well enough to go." The liberation of Refuge 7 took 4 days. Human Marines fought through Kreth defensive positions, while Vellani medics followed close behind. The medics treated wounded soldiers from both sides. They refused to carry weapons, but they also refused to stay behind the lines. 17 Vellani died in that operation, the first of their species to fall in combat in 7,000 years. When the last Kreth position fell, Maria was there. She had pushed herself out of the medical ward too early, but she needed to see this. The gates of the labor camp opened. 3,000 humans walked out. They were thin and scarred, but they were alive. One woman stopped in front of Catherine. She stared at the tall alien with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "You came," she whispered. Someone finally came. Catherine knelt down to meet her eyes. "We should have come sooner. We are sorry." The woman shook her head slowly. "You came. That's what matters. Maria watched humans and Villani embrace. Former prisoners crying on the shoulders of aliens who had traveled across the galaxy to save them. She thought about everything that had happened. The battles. The losses. The choices that had brought them to this moment. It was worth it, she realized. All of it was worth it. The tide of the war had turned. And it would never turn back. The war lasted another 3 years after the Battle of Cygnus Gate. It was not easy. The Kreth were many and desperate. They fought for the survival of an empire that had ruled for thousands of years. They would not give up without a terrible struggle. But they were alone now. The Liberation Fleet grew stronger with each passing month. Other species, inspired by the Villani example, began to join the alliance. Civilizations that had stayed neutral for centuries decided that some fights were worth joining. The slaves of the Kreth Dominion rose up too. On mining worlds and factory planets, people who had been worked nearly to death found new courage. They sabotaged equipment. They hid weapons. They waited for the Liberation Fleet to arrive, and when it did, they fought alongside their rescuers. Captain Maria Santos, now fully recovered, led many of those liberation missions. She had been promoted 3 times since Cygnus Gate. Her crew was a mix of humans, Villani, and members of 4 other species. They had become a family. Admiral Blake grew older and grayer, but he never stopped fighting. He led from the front, taking risks that made his staff nervous. When people told him to be more careful, he would shake his head and smile. "I've been waiting my whole life to see this," he would say. "I'm not going to watch from the back." First Minister Catherine stayed by Blake's side through everything. The human and the Villani had become more than allies. They had become friends. The final battle came above the Kreth, homeworld. The Liberation Fleet had pushed deep into Dominion space, freeing world after world. Now they faced the heart of the enemy empire. A gray planet covered with industrial wastelands, where billions of slaves worked to feed the Kreth war machine. 200 Liberation ships faced the last 100 Kreth vessels. It should have been an overwhelming victory. But the Kreth fought with the desperation of those who know they have nothing left to lose. The battle lasted 2 days. Maria lost her second ship during that fight. A Kreth suicide attack destroyed the vessel she had commanded since Cygnus Gate. She was rescued again, this time by a human ship crewed by former Kreth slaves who had joined the alliance. "You're making a habit of this," the rescue ship's captain told her with a grin. His name was Marcus Cole, and he had been a slave in Kreth mines for 15 years before the liberation. Maria laughed despite her wounds. "Maybe I should learn to duck." On the second day, the Kreth High Command sent a message to Admiral Blake. "They're requesting terms," his communications officer reported. "They want to discuss surrender." Blake sat in his command chair, looking older than his 70 years. He'd been fighting this war for over a decade. He had lost 2 sons, countless friends, and pieces of himself he would never get back. What kind of surrender? He asked. Unconditional. "They're giving up everything." Blake closed his eyes. He had dreamed of this moment for so long. Now that it was here, he felt tired more than triumphant. "Accept," he said quietly. "Tell them we accept." The Treaty of Sereth was signed on the Villani homeworld. It was Catherine's idea. The planet that had never known war would host the ceremony that ended one. Diplomats from a dozen species worked together to write terms that were firm but fair. The Kreth would be held responsible for their crimes, but they would not be destroyed. Their empire would end, but their people would survive. Maria attended as a witness. She stood near the back of the Great Hall, watching as representatives signed document after document. Beside her was Terrace, the young Villani medic who had become famous during the war. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "To your people, I mean. You spent 7,000 years as pacifists. Where do you go from here? Terrace was silent for a moment, watching the ceremony with her large, glowing eyes. We go forward, she said finally, as we always have. But we carry new knowledge now. Peace is precious, yes. Worth protecting. Worth sacrificing for. But it cannot be bought with the suffering of others. She turned to face Maria. Your species taught us that. In all your chaos and contradictions, you taught us perhaps the most important lesson we have ever learned. What lesson? That the measure of a civilization is not what it will do to survive. It is what it will sacrifice for others. 10 years after the war ended, Admiral Christopher Blake died peacefully in his home in Geneva. He was 80 years old. His body had finally given out, worn down by decades of stress and old battle wounds. But his mind stayed sharp until the end, and his spirit never wavered. The funeral was attended by representatives from 47 species. Humans and Villani and dozens of others filled the memorial hall. Former enemies sat beside former allies. Former slaves sat beside those who had freed them. First Minister Catherine, now ancient by Villani standards, came to pay his respects to his oldest friend. Captain Maria Santos delivered the eulogy. She was a full admiral now, with gray in her hair and lines on her face. But her voice was strong as she spoke. He used to say that we fight because some things matter more than survival, she told the crowd. He believed that. He lived it. And in the end, he was proven right. She looked out over the assembly at all the different beings gathered together. We didn't just survive. We changed the galaxy. We proved that courage and compassion aren't weaknesses. We proved that standing together matters more than standing alone. She smiled slightly. And we made some pretty good friends along the way. On Sereth Prime, in a public square in the capital city, a monument was built. It showed two figures standing side by side. One human, one Villani. Their hands were not raised in victory. Their faces did not show triumph. They simply stood together, looking out toward the stars. The words carved at the base were simple. In partnership, we found our purpose. In sacrifice, we found our peace. May future generations remember not what we fought against, but what we stood for. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the monument. Some were human, some Villani, some from species that had joined the Alliance later or been freed from Kreth rule. They would stand in silence, reading the words, thinking their own thoughts. Maria visited once, many years after the war ended. She was an old woman by then, retired from service. Spending her days teaching young officers about the battle she had fought, she stood before the monument for a long time, remembering friends who had died and friends who had lived, remembering the choices that had been made, remembering why they had fought. A young Villani approached her. You were there, weren't you? During the war? Maria nodded. I was there. What was it like? When our peoples first fought together? Maria thought about the question carefully before answering. It was terrifying, she said honestly. We didn't know if it would work. We didn't know if we could trust each other. We only knew that we had to try. She looked up at the two figures carved in stone. And then something amazing happened. We discovered that we weren't as different as we thought. That courage and sacrifice and love aren't just human things or Villani things. They're universal. The Kreth thought they could conquer the galaxy because they were strong. They were wrong. True strength isn't about power or weapons or numbers. It's about what you're willing to stand for, what you're willing to protect, what you're willing to give up so others can live. She placed her hand on the base of the monument, feeling the carved words beneath her fingers. The Villani chose to stand with humanity, and that choice changed everything. Not just for us, for the whole galaxy. The young Villani bowed his head in respect. Thank you for telling me. Maria smiled. Thank you for asking. She walked away slowly, leaving the monument behind. but she carried its meaning with her, as she had carried it since the day the first Vellani ships appeared at Unity Station. Some choices echo through eternity. Some partnerships reshape the stars, and some lessons once learned are never forgotten. The Vellani chose to stand with humanity, not because they had to, but because they finally understood what standing meant. And that choice changed everything.